Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. The book of Genesis is filled with enigmatic and controversial passages that have sparked heated debates among scholars, religious figures, and curious minds for over 2,000 years. Among these mysteries, one of the most contentious is undoubtedly the curse of Ham, a sentence pronounced by Noah that still raises questions to this day. But what was this curse really about? What led Noah to curse his own descendant? And more importantly, has this passage been understood correctly over the centuries? This is one of the most misinterpreted and distorted texts in the Holy Scriptures. Even worse, it has been used to justify atrocities and even to fuel the false idea of a supposed superiority among peoples. Today, we will dive into this mystery, dissect every detail of this passage, and finally reveal the truth behind the curse of Ham. If you enjoy content like this, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Now get ready for an intriguing journey through the hidden secrets of Genesis. The Curse of Ham, the true story. The so-called Curse of Ham is undoubtedly one of the most distorted passages in the Holy Scriptures. For centuries, especially from the Middle Ages to the modern era, this passage was used to justify ideas of superiority among peoples, sustaining false arguments that some were born to be masters, while others were destined for servitude. However, this interpretation is completely mistaken and goes against the true meaning of the biblical text. The account of the curse of Ham appears in the book of Genesis and describes a punishment imposed by Noah, not directly on Ham, but on his youngest son, Canaan. The episode takes place in a peculiar context. After planting a vineyard and becoming drunk on the wine, Noah falls asleep naked inside his tent. Ham, his son, upon seeing his father's nakedness, commits what is considered a shameful act. Although the text is not entirely explicit about the severity of Ham's action, what we know is that this behavior resulted in a strong curse pronounced by Noah. But why did Noah curse his grandson, Canaan, and not Ham, who made the mistake? This is one of the most intriguing points of the narrative. To understand it, it is essential to consider the context of that time. The world was at a moment of rebirth, newly emerged from the flood that had devastated the earth. In ancient societies, especially in a primitive tribal structure, a man's greatest wealth was his descendants, his offspring, his legacy. Therefore, by cursing Canaan, Noah was in fact cursing Ham in an even deeper way, dishonoring his lineage. In that culture, a curse on a child meant much more than a personal punishment. It was a mark that could carry implications for generations. And that's how this story was perpetuated, later being distorted to serve interests that had nothing to do with the true purpose of the text. Many people don't understand why Noah took such a drastic action in this episode. Some defend that Noah was right in his decision, while others view the episode as an injustice. But when we analyze the text deeply, we realize that the issue is much more complex than a simple curse. The account shows Noah some time after the flood, in a newly rebuilt world. He decides to cultivate a vineyard, and when he harvests the fruit, he ferments the wine. The problem arises when he drinks too much and becomes completely drunk. In the biblical context, drunkenness is also considered a sin, which leads us to an interesting detail. Noah was not exempt from mistakes. In his state of drunkenness, Noah exposes himself inside his tent. It is at this moment that his son Ham comes into the scene. He sees his father in a humiliating situation and, instead of acting with respect and discretion, goes out and tells his brothers, Shem and Japheth. Unlike Ham, Shem and Japheth do not expose the situation. On the contrary, they walk backward and cover their father with a blanket, avoiding looking at his nakedness. The big question is, what was Ham's mistake? Many interpret that Noah was unjust in punishing him, especially because Noah himself was drunk. But the narrative reveals to us that the problem was not just seeing the father's nakedness, but how Ham dealt with the situation. Instead of acting with respect and trying to preserve Noah's dignity, Ham chose to expose him. Ham's mistake, therefore, was not just witnessing the scene, but failing to assist his father with discretion and respect. He did not protect Noah's honor, something that, within the culture of the time, was a serious disrespect. His brothers, on the other hand, understood the gravity of the situation and acted to repair the incident without causing further embarrassment. Thus, when Noah wakes up and learns what happened, he reacts forcefully, cursing Canaan, Ham's son. This detail is crucial for understanding that the punishment was tied to the shame that Ham caused his father, not simply to the act of seeing him naked. Many wonder, what does Canaan, Ham's son, have to do with this story? After all, if it was Ham who made the mistake, why did the curse fall on his son? To understand this, we need to delve into the tribal and primitive context of that time. As mentioned, in ancient culture, attacking a man directly was not as devastating as attacking his seed, his lineage. A man's descendants were his greatest legacy, and hurting that legacy was the greatest punishment someone could receive. That's exactly what Noah did. Instead of punishing Ham directly, he cursed his descendants, specifically Canaan. One of the greatest misunderstandings of this passage is the idea that all of Ham's lineages were cursed. This interpretation, which was used throughout history to justify ideas of racial superiority, has no basis in the original biblical text. Noah's curse was specific to Canaan and his descendants, not to all of Ham's children. The text itself is clear. Canaan will be a servant of Shem and Japheth. In other words, the curse did not extend to all of Ham's descendants, but only to the lineage of Canaan. However, throughout history, many ill-intentioned people have used this passage to falsely claim that all of Ham's descendants were cursed, which simply isn't written anywhere in the scriptures. In reality, Ham's descendants were blessed by God himself. The book of Genesis shows that God blessed Noah and his sons, which means Ham also received this divine blessing. But after all, who was Ham, and which peoples descended from him? In ancient Jewish tradition, as well as in early Christian interpretation, Ham is considered the ancestor of the Hamitic peoples. These peoples are mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, where the great nations that arose after the flood are listed. Who were the Hamites? Since ancient times, Jews interpreted that Ham was the father of the African peoples, the ancestors of the black nations. This was not just a cultural view, but an interpretation based on the linguistic structure of biblical Hebrew itself. The name Ham is associated with the idea of something burned or dark. His son's name, Cush, literally means black, and the Cushite peoples were identified in the scriptures as black-skinned peoples. Thus, the Genesis narrative not only debunks the false idea of a curse upon all of Ham's descendants, but also gives us a glimpse into the origins of many nations. The misinterpretation of this passage has been widely exploited throughout history, but the text itself contradicts this distorted view. Once again, it is crucial to emphasize a key point. Noah's curse did not affect all of Ham's descendants, but rather the lineage of Canaan, the Canaanites. According to Jewish sources, such as the Book of Jubilees, Canaan was given a second curse. Why? He took land that belonged to the descendants of Shem, disobeying both his father, Ham, and his brothers Cush, the ancestors of the Cushite peoples, or the Black Nations, and Misraim, father of the ancient Egyptians, originally also Hamites. The account says that Ham and his other sons rebuked Canaan, warning him not to take possession of land that did not belong to him. However, Canaan disobeyed and, as a result, suffered the second curse. The scriptures show us that the Canaanites, throughout history, became an idolatrous people, engaging in acts considered abominable in the eyes of God. Thus, the curse on this lineage was confirmed. However, there is an essential detail that many ignore. This curse was not irreversible. The Bible itself reveals that many Canaanites were saved because they converted and began to follow the true God, the God of Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This means that, from the beginning, divine mercy allowed anyone, regardless of their lineage, to be redeemed through faith and obedience to God. A fascinating curiosity that many overlook is that several Canaanites were saved and played important roles in the biblical narrative. A classic example is Rahab, the Canaanite woman from the city of Jericho, who was rescued by her faith and ended up becoming part of the Messiah's lineage. Another notable name is Uriah the Hittite, who also descended from the Canaanite peoples. God himself became deeply angered with David for the murder of Uriah, showing that the Canaanite lineage was not irreversibly rejected by God. Throughout history, especially in the Middle Ages, many distorted the biblical narrative to justify slavery. Some claimed that all of Ham's descendants had been cursed and therefore should serve the Japhethites, erroneously associating them with European peoples. This idea was used to justify the enslavement of many peoples, especially Africans, over the centuries. However, the biblical and historical reality is quite different. Slavery was not exclusive to a single people. For example, the Israelites themselves were enslaved by the Egyptians, who were descendants of Ham. Centuries later, the Israelites were taken captive by the Babylonians, descendants of the Chaldeans, during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Interestingly, Abraham was also a Chaldean, highlighting the complexity of interactions between these peoples. The Celts and Germans, peoples with very fair skin, were also enslaved by the Romans, who saw these peoples as barbarians, regardless of their skin color. In other words, the idea that the curse of Canaan was a divine justification for the enslavement of African peoples is a complete distortion of the Bible. This false interpretation was propagated for centuries, but it has no basis in the original biblical text. The true message of the Scriptures teaches us that God's salvation and blessings are not determined by ethnicity or lineage, but by faith and obedience to the Creator. The Bible clearly shows us that various African peoples served the Lord, being mentioned throughout the Scriptures as part of God's divine plan. God, in His infinite mercy, worked to rescue them from idolatry, sending prophets to call them back to the true faith. A striking example occurs in the book of Isaiah, where God commands the prophet to walk naked for 3 years as a prophetic sign to the Ethiopians and Egyptians, urging them to turn back to the Almighty God. This demonstrates that far from being cursed and rejected, these peoples were worthy of divine attention and the call to salvation. I'm often asked if Africans were cursed by Noah, and the answer is clear. This is a complete lie. Noah's curse was not on all of Ham's descendants, but specifically on the Canaanites. And here is a fundamental detail. This curse did not come from God, but from Noah. Even so, many Canaanites ended up serving the Lord, demonstrating that faith and obedience to God were always more important than ethnic or genealogical origin. I hope that now everyone has understood once and for all the true meaning of Ham's curse. If you liked this content, leave your comment and share your opinion on the subject. If you'd like me to talk about another similar topic, feel free to suggest it in the comments. May God bless everyone, and we'll see you soon.